How's it going, everybody, and welcome to another video on the how to write this production ready React application, a course taught by Brian Holt, a software engineer that has previously worked at Reddit, Netflix, uh, Microsoft, Snowflake, and now he's the current VP at SQLite Cloud. And here we, through this entire course, we look at several techniques and tools that allow us to build these production ready React apps. Techniques like code splitting, server-side rendering, transition and testing, which is something that we're going to see about that, as well as tools like Tailwind, TypeScript, and Redux. Okay, so this is part of the second segment, or this is the second part of the complete intro to React, where this is also a course that I have here. I also finished that up. So here in the complete intro to React, we look at the how to set up your React project with ESLint. What is ESLint? Also look at Prettier. And then how you can now use Vite. What is Vite? And the core React concept, such as GSX. What is GSX? Hooks, custom hooks, effect. What is the trade-off of effects? As well as how you can now render elements, how you can create components in your React components, and what is a rule of thumb, especially when you do that kind of thing, and how you can now use and interact with forms, uncontrolled form and control form. So with that, then we look also at the React DevTools, okay? And this is part of the core of React. Then we look at React capabilities, such as React Router, how you can install, how you can install that, or how you can add that to your applications. The React Query, which is this data management library for syncing, catching, fetching, and update with the server, our data. How can we do that? Which version we are currently using, version 4, okay? As well as the React hook form, React form hooks. How can we look and how can we work with class component, which is something that you are not going to see that much, but it's important to recognize that there might some code bases that actually host that, and especially if you're going to do some acquisition from other companies, which is exactly what the vast majority of these companies actually are doing. They buy and build, right? That's essentially their work. They buy and build, okay? And then how can we now is look at the special cases like error boundary. This is when you can define when you define the logic to talk to your error logger servers like TrackJS, Sentry, okay? Because whenever a React component throws an error, or when there is something wrong with that, most of the time it's through a bad most of the time is through a bad API, through a malformed API response. So what you can do about it? So you can cut that error and then send it to those servers. Also, I look at how you can create these components that are outside of the normal render tree, such as models or using Portal here, as well as context, which is something that we don't have that, and this is a new recent addition to the core of React. Okay, so this is the core of React. Okay, according to Brian Holt. Okay, and now here on the yep, and now here on this advanced course, or how you can write now production ready React apps, hooks in depth. Again, this is our very narrow specific hooks that are relevant for Facebook, and it might help you to solve some use case and to cover some use cases. So we have the use ref. So when you want to attach, or when you want to get a particularly DOM element or a computation or an object, so you can let it on use it. The other is use reducer. So here is now when, after all, reducer is just a fancy name to say this is a function that takes an state and an actions that you're going to apply to generate a new bit of action. And the way to do that is by usually object.assign. When you tell, hey, this is the new object created, and this is the new shape or the new state of the object that we're going to create. Then I look at the use callback and use memo. Use callback is usually when you want is to when you want to detect change or reactive change, okay, and you want to do something about it. You want to return something about it. Use memo is used, for example, update your UI from an app level state data, for example, from a context or from a slice in Redux. So this is how you can do that. And also with use memo, you can catch that result. So you don't have to recompute that again. And the other is use callback, which is most of the time useful for detect or to avoid unnecessary re-renderings, okay? Which is something that when I work for that particular company here, when they use is the callback. All right, for example, if I want to take a look at a callback here, wait, what? You want to take a look at the example, and I use callback here, for example, right? So for example, you can use callback when a component or when a provider runs once. That might be one use case for that. Or when you want is to also yeah, when you want to also is define some properties you want to do about it, okay, and you want to do some computation for that, as well as catching. So we have use callback and use memo, and the difference is that from their docs, use callback is something that was before use memo. From their docs, they recommend to use memo rather than use callback. and I think that use Memo is for it's a shorthand from Memoize function, which is run a computation only once if you already previously know the answer. Okay, something useful, especially for example, to know the so for example to load some assets. For example, let's say for example to load a light themes on the fly, or a dog theme on the fly. So once you load those assets, now you don't need to actually reload that or call that again. You already have there. This is a particular use of Memo as well. Okay, so then we also look at other hooks such as use layout and use ID. Use ID is most of the time used for forms. They don't tell you to use that for providing a key to a list of render elements. Use data from the backend, or if you don't have, it's preferably that you use some library that is UUID. And then we have is the use layout. Again, this is very narrow specific for Facebook problems, because the idea here is that use render or use effect calls the callback every time or after a render happens, or in this case after the render function. So depend of how you define your use effect. If you in the second parameter doesn't pass is an array, what happens is it will now re-render anytime a state change, a local state change on React. So if you provide now an empty array, it only do that once. If you provide now an array of elements, it's gonna change that, or we're gonna trigger the callback whenever those elements in the array change. Okay. So the subtle difference between the use effect and the use layout is now you don't have this ghosting effect or re-rendering element twice. That's what they call use layout effect. Or use layout, and that's cool. Then we look at Tailwinds, which is this framework that allows us to write this little tiny CSS class that makes our components, quite frankly, a little bit verbose, but is a Tailwind compiler that takes all of this and generates the bare minimum CSS code. So from their docs, they say that it is way much more better to maintain HTML elements rather than a huge CSS code base. I look at how you can install this by looking at the Tailwind or the component, the Tailwind compiler, the transpiler, or in this case Post CSS, which is a transpiler, pretty much like Babel, but for CSS, as well as the auto prefixer. Then I look at how can we add that component, how can you extend the functionality of Tailwinds, as well as how you can easily define layouts per breakpoints, whether it's a small or mobile or tablet, laptop, desktop, large, 4K, and also you can modify all of those breakpoints. I wouldn't recommend that. I prefer to stick with that layout. And then I look at the advanced techniques such as code splitting and server-side rendering. So I'm not gonna dive deep too much on that. The TLDR is that code splitting is looking for what is the best possible way to load the bare minimum code to teach our app to start and set up by showing something to the user while in the background running everything that it needs to. And the server-side rendering is focus on reducing the initial painting. All right. There's also something important concept like service worker that you can take a look at that. The other is this low priority rendering. React has this notion of high priority rendering or high priority rendering, where we have is all of our components, class or React component, and then we have is this low re-rendering components. Okay, where here the TLDR is that you're going to tell React, hey, I get these huge things to load, so I want you to be ready for that. And that's where we use this use transition. And the other is use defer value. This is use defer value. Okay, I load something already big, so I want you to do something for me. And the other is the use transition, where you say the use transition, use transition, where in use transition you say, hey, we're about to load something heavier, so we need to do something here. Okay, use transition is when you want to load something bigger and you want to notify React to do something about it. And the use defer value is when you already have something big and you want to notify React to do something about it. This is also from the user perspective, and remember, these are very narrow specific use case for Facebook, because perceived slowness in their app can cost millions of dollars. If you have that kind of problem, please send me a check. I will gladly to work with you. So then I look at TypeScript. What is the value proposition of TypeScript, especially as developers using VS Code or ID like that? Sorry. Is that, hey, I'm going to, is that with TypeScript we can have this live coding documentations about the intent of the code, about the intent you had when you wrote this code or when someone else wrote this code. So there we look at what are the anatomy of TypeScript, which is the compiler. Then you run the compiler to give you this initialization, pretty much like npm init, but in this case for TypeScript compiler, it will generate a configuration file where you in there can indicate, hey, TypeScript, I want you to output is JavaScript or ECMAScript in this version 2022. Okay, I want you to recognize is this flavor of JavaScript like JSX. Let me handle is the now model versions of models, or the modern way of models. Okay, which is this, and now you can set to strict to true or false depending on which state you are when you're doing this migration, because after all, this section of TypeScript was focused on how you can migrate your JSX file into TSX. All right, and you can start that from your React Leaf components, for example, the models. And before that, you should indicate to ESLint, your linter, hey, this is the code. Sorry. Hey, this is the plugins that I want you to, and the parser that I want you to recognize to help me to import TypeScript files, help me to link TypeScript files, as well as you can understand TypeScript files. So you can now provide is a code style to your code, a recommended code style. So then I look at how you can do that for your, how you can do that migration for your Leaf React components, such as models. And then from your API response, for example, depend of your application, you will like to start with the service, okay? And there is when things becomes a little bit harder, but it's because from 10 to 60%, according to Brian Hall and my experience as well, it's misery, because you don't know if TypeScript is actually show you proper TypeScript errors, or if TypeScript is being finicky about it. So here is when you now need to navigate through the code, okay? And anytime you make this migration, you do that one line by line. So again, you can start with your service or your API, which is good, all right? And from there, you say, all right, let me also define some TypeScript here for our API endpoints. Remember that TypeScript is just only for debugging or prevent runtime errors. It won't help you with API error response or request. That's why we have, for example, TRCP, TypeScript Remote Procedural Call, which is a way of how you can now have type safe end-to-end, which is something from actually Remix is using that, TRPC, Next as well, okay. And then you can things like that. That's the reason why a lot of people actually are using this kind of thing, and also in Next. And there's no surprise. There is definitely not surprise to me at all. Okay. Then also how we can migrate our React or functional components, as well as our DOM operation that we have to, or user interaction with our DOM, how finicky it can be TypeScript, how defensive we must be when we write our code. Also with context, how you must define is the shape of that for testing, which is a useful use case. Also for our forms, React query as well, because they also have typings for that. How you can integrate that to your code, and then how the important thing of all of this, which is define some script for linting, TypeScript checking, and formatting and code formatting. That's the three aspects when you define this particular scripts. For example, a lint, when you tell to ESLint, hey, I want you to now lint TypeScript files, or TSX. Or in the case of formatting, hey, I want now to prettier provide is the proper format for that. And with TypeScript check, If everything went well, it won't throw any errors. Okay, and this is part of the step that you're gonna put when you build your code for production. So when you do that, now your code is almost ready for production, because now you need to also pass some sort of test, unit test, something that we're gonna see that later. So the course, or today's video, is all about Redux. So Redux, here we're going to talk about Redux Toolkit, which is a framework around Redux. So in the previous versions of React, we don't have any way of how we can handle its app level state data. We have to rely on third-party libraries, such as Redux or Mobox. And there are other libraries. So once React caught us once React caught us to not need to use Redux anymore, since they integrate this in the React core. Okay, in my case, I kind of feel like in my case, I kind of let it fall by the sidewalk here. But the idea here of this video is to learn how to use Redux, so you don't need to do that. And first things first, what is Redux? Again, it's this store that we can have to centralize all of our state in our app. Here's where we put is data like use, for example, if you're building an e-commerce, like users, product, orders, and on the React component is where you define all of your UI states. Why does it matter? Why Redux is so helpful? Because or Redux Toolkit, specifically with React Toolkit. So because before this we have something like so we have to rely on Redux. And then Context came out and it was very horrible. And over time, it made Redux superfluous, and Context has now been a popular choice. It's getting better. So the idea with this Redux Toolkit is to now make the state management less verbose, as well as by having the ability to test and debug and state from A to B. Okay, if you have that ability, you're going to eliminate an entire classes of bugs and errors that might happen in your app, or that your app is going to have. So that's one of the reasons why I love about Redux, is that it's testable. Is this readable? Is this testable? Is this debuggable? So first thing first, we look at how can we install Redux. We install is Redux, as well as the glue between Redux and React. We install is Redux Toolkit, and then the Redux glue with React. So you can use Redux, this particular pattern, with other libraries like Angular, Vue. Okay, and the goal here is to migrate some of our app states to our store. So first, we start by installing the library, and then is by defining is the store, or the entry point of that, when you configure is the store, as well as the reducer. And the reducer is just functions that takes an old state with an actions to generate a new bit of actions through the object.assign. So this is now us creating creating is a store for that. So we create is our store for at the app level, and then we need to create something called slice, which is a concept from React, where they say, hey, I'm going to create or we can create is this bundle of state that you can do everything. You can put it all of this, and then we can add that to our central store. And that's exactly what we did. For example, with our create slides, when we define is the name, we define also the initial state, whatever the initial state it is, you can say the value, and then you define is your reducers. These functions that takes a null state and perform an actions to generate a new bit of state. In our case, it was quite simple from that. So we can here is define filters. So we can here is define, yeah, to filter our data. We can also define is the so here is what we can define is our filters. We can define is our data or any state that you want to change. And this is a pattern from their docs, where here they're taking is a lot of the hard work from that. So when you define is the actions, and then you export is the reducers that you want to do, okay? Because quite frankly, what is doing behind the scenes is just generating is a function, because this, after all, is just transforming is a function. Essentially, what it's doing here is just saying, hey, this is a function here. Let's say adopt, okay, and this function is going to return. Okay, this function is going to return is the state, okay, okay, and this function is going to return is the state or this. Let me actually see what it's doing.
So now we have it all data out of Redux. It's okay to do it this way, but watch version 4 of this course. I make you do all.
Exactly. So this is like it's saying, hey, you're going to return now is this. Return is the type, which is from your action. Okay, whatever action you defined previously, or in this case type adopt here. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. And as well as the payload, which is the pet, or the state here. So this function, what it's doing behind the scenes with Redux Toolkit is to assign this, so we don't have to do that for ourselves, which is quite annoying, by the way. Very, very annoying, especially if you have to define that for several reducers. Okay. Yep. Okay. Cool. For several reducers. So that's great. That's cool. That's very, very interesting. So this is one of the reasons why we have this weird pattern, because what it's doing behind the scenes here, the adopt slide.actions, is to say, hey, I'm going to generate a function here. I'm going to generate this function called with the name of that action or that reducer, where you got the state, okay, and I'm going to now return is I'm going to now return here is an object that will contain is the type as the name of that action. So in our case is the adopt, okay, the type of the actions, as well as the payload, all right, which is the state. That's exactly what it's doing this. So it's actually save us a lot of time in for this repeated function here. And then we got our reducers, okay, which is actually is this function that we're going to use to notify the store, the Redux, hey, you're going to notify the Redux, hey, this is in the slice, hey, this is a bunch, or this is a bundle of states here. Makes a lot of sense, which is exactly what we did here. Hey, this is adopt pet, and remember the adopt pet where we're exporting is the reducer. Okay, so we are adding this slice to our store. That's great. That's great. Now we're looking here at how you can wire up things. How you can now read or storing data out of that. So for that we use this the Redux, the React Redux, like use this patch, okay, as well as the action that we are getting from our slice, okay. And here, whenever function we want is to actually store our data, which is in our case this, we're going to call is the dispatch or use dispatch, this custom hook. It's a way to say, hey, I want you to now, given this actions, pass is the payload. So I want you to now, whenever the state change or whenever the user click here, I want you to now reflect those change on our slice, which is part of our store. That's to me something interesting and powerful, because this actually works like a charm. Then we look at how can we now
so now we have
pull
all
out
set up
data
to track
from that. And this is when things getting a little bit quite interesting because of this. So whatever place you want to pull data from your store to show that, you must use something called useSelector from Redux. Okay. In useSelector, you pass is the proper function, or you pass a function here, which is the stay and arrow function, where you're going to now to check out that particular property. So why this is important? Because useSelector after all is a subscription. It means that any time the property that you define here or the object you define there change, Redux detect that change and say, oh, I need now to tell React component where it was where we detect the change to re-render that. And this can be problematic, especially if you have now if you are a huge object here, because anytime any of the property of the object change, it will re-render that component. So that's pretty bad. Okay, that's bad. So to prevent that, only subscribe to the proper property you want to. That's interesting. That's very, very.
I'm going to say, then just Redux knows like something changed.
Remember, after all, the value proposition of React is to render elements. So if for some reason, by using its useSelector from Redux, you define it as an object instead of a property, okay? So you don't put the bare minimum amount of data there. Any time that any property inside of that object change, it will rerun. It will rerun, it will re-render that component when you define the use selector. And this is when the performance issue came around. Okay.
Therefore, I'm going to tell search params time to re-render. Why is this important? Why can't I just do adopted? I'm just going to force search params to re-render. That's bad, because you're going to force a lot of unnecessary re-renders. Does that make sense? So this function is important, is what I'm trying to underline. Please make sure that you're only pulling out the bare minimum amount of data that you absolutely need for this particular component. Do not pull out unnecessary data.
Exactly. So do not pull out unnecessary data. Peter.
Okay. Okay, so I think now we should be able to go look at our app, and everything should work the same way that it did before.
Exactly. So now we can take a look at our app here. We say adopted data here, like so. Use this patch. No, we're not gonna do this. Okay. Oh, I get it. That's interesting. Because it defines something called like that. Because previously, all right, we set is the state for that with our animal here. Previously, we set is the state of our app there.
But what's cool is this is all coming from Redux now. It's not coming from changes in Redux ever. It's states. So if I update my Redux, it's stored in the adopted pet. Data out of load, and then it's going to give that to Redux, that I get to test. How would you test that with context? It's possible, particular component. Do not pull out unnecessary data. Coming from Redux now, it's not coming from React context.
So what we can do here is something like this. So right now I don't want you to, in fact, is do this. Because we are not going to do anything there. Like so. And they say, hey, object is not being used. That's right. So that's no problem. The same for our here, because now we're using something called is the okay, exactly. We define user API service. That's lovely. Exactly. That's lovely. Okay. 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 So if I run this, right? So npm run def, and then I navigate to this, I should be able to load this. Why there is an error here? It say, hey, the search above occurs, search pattern. We type errors, the state search pattern is undefined. No data found, the state pet API. Okay. Okay, because okay. Oh my god. Anyway, it's because this is something that is already finished. This code is something that is already finished, and we are working towards that.
It's more indirection, but let's talk a little about the testability of this now. I can test this reducer. I can test how this gets created. I can test
So the thing here is this. So now we can test the reducer, no, but this is not, is our slice name. Exactly, is here. Now we can test the reducer, the slice.
Talk a little about the testability of this now. I can test this reducer. I can test how this gets created.
Mm-hmm. So we can test from this. So from this code, or from this slice, okay, on the adopted pet slice.js. Okay, so now we can test. Okay, so now we can test the reducer, how the slice is created, how the function is created.
I can test the action creators.
Mm-hmm. The action creator, as well as the reducer.
There's lots of steps here now that I get to test.
But there is a lot of steps here to test.
How would you test that with context? It's possible, but it takes a lot of like introspection on your components to test context.
How you can test that with context? It is possible, but requires a lot of introspection.
In other words, we don't typically test context because it's such a pain to test.
We typically, well, let me know. No. Filters provider, and even though you have to test that jobs action, but this is more easy to test, by the way. This is way much more easy to test, especially with our context, and depending on what our context want to do. Okay, because sometimes you might have your context there. Okay. As well as your actions context and the context creator, like so. So this is pretty much easy to test that. Okay, because it's going to generate a new state of that. That's one of the reasons why we don't use object.assign anymore. In fact, we create is the object with triple dots, where they say, hey, whatever it got this object, I want you to spread that. Okay, and assign all of the payload or state that you want to do that. That's one of the reasons why we don't use object.assign any longer. We can, but there is no need to. Makes a lot of sense. Exactly. Okay. With they say typically they don't test context. It to me it's like sometimes you do.
Just to kind of give you some more examples here, let's go put location, animal, and breed into Redux Toolkit. I probably wouldn't typically do this because this is only used here. But the nice thing about this is it's going to allow us to like keep track of all this stuff across page loads, which is going to be minorly useful to us. So make a new file here, call it search params slice.js, and import create slice again from @Redux Toolkit. Export const search params slice equals create slice. I guess you don't really need to export that part, so just leave that. Search param slice, and you're going to say create slice. Yep, that's good. Name search params. Initial state.
Initial state for that.
You can give a location of empty string, a breed of empty string, and animal of empty string. Cool. Reducers. All right, so I'm just going to make one reducer at the moment called all, which is just going to replace everything. So I'm going to say state action, and all this does is going to say state.value equals action.payload. Because for our particular application, we don't have an occasion where we're setting anything other than all of them all at once. But hopefully you could imagine I could have one set like be update location or something like that, and all it would do is set just the location, one for setting just the breed, one for setting just the animal, right? That's all stuff you could do here, but for now all we need is an all one. Okay, and then down here we're going to say export const all equals search param slice.actions, and then export default search params slice.reducer. And you are mad about, yeah, I don't need a, well, I need an arrow function there, rather. Okay, there we go. This basically looks almost identical to our previous one, other than we have a little bit.
When you define is an arrow function here, when you define is an arrow function here, exactly. When you must define is this is an arrow function here. When you define this as an arrow function, you are essentially indicating to this object, hey, the value of this will be wherever you have pointed here, okay, which is making the value of this lexicographically. In other words, the value of this will so the value of this will be is when it was written, no when it was invocated.
The more initial state, otherwise it looks identical. Okay, great. Let's go to store.js. We're going to import search params here, import search param slice from search params slice. Okay, that's pretty easy. That's all set up now. Let's go to search params.jsx. Here, we're going to import at the top. We have the use selector here. We're also going to import a use dispatch up here, use dispatch.
In the search parameter.
And we're going to import all
adopted pet slice.
from search
Oh.
params slice as well. Okay, up here with your hooks, we're going to have a dispatch. So const dispatch equals use dispatch to give that
Okay.
dispatch function back.
Mm-hmm.
Const adopted pet. We did that already. So that's there. And then we're going to also have our request params. So const request params is going to be assigned use selector state dot search params dot value, and then I can drop all of this stuff up here.
Because now
So don't
you
need
are
any of that.
actually mapping is the request param, that's right, from your slice. Exactly, which is search param.
Cool. And then down here, instead of saying set request params, we're just going to say dispatch,
Dispatch all.
wrap this in an all. There you go. So let's go back.
So now let me actually implement this on the code, and you're gonna walk through with me along with it. No, no. What is it? Okay. Screen capture here. There you got it. Application capture here. Window capture. Code adopted pet slide. There you got it. Okay. Because this is too vastly. All right. And then you got it this. And okay, we put that right below here. We disable this, and you got it. Okay, so the idea here with it is to say, okay, now that we define is our, so now that we know how to pull data from a store and send it and store that, okay, store that using dispatch and the proper action that you define on your under the Redoster slice that will be connected to the central store, the Redux. You can think of the Redux as this is an imperfect analogy, but you can think of that as this tiny little database where you can query or get data, when you can dispatch actions and get data using uselector, which is a subscription to that. And a subscription is whenever that particular state change, Redux says, oh, this state changed, then let me now re-render the component where it was defined, where that was used. So that's what you have to be careful about when you define is your state for that. Yes, because otherwise you can, if you are not if you're not precise of which property you want to get, and you take an object from that, then you will have some performance penalty here, because now Redux is going to re-render whenever those properties on that object that you subscribe to re-render that. So you don't want that. That's bad. Okay. Cool. Cool. Yep. Cool. Because of that, okay, now we're going to create something called search pattern slice. Okay, and here we're gonna import from our React or Redux toolkit the create slice. here, okay, and here we define is our slice, which is search pattern slice, okay. Here we define is the created slice. An object here when you use define is the name for that, which is search patterns. This was something that you're gonna use when you want to subscribe to a particular slice. Then we have this initial state, where here you can define is things like the on the adopted. Let me see. What? Okay, enough. We're in there. We're going to define is on the search pattern. Okay. It blow away that. Okay. But here's the animal here. The animal, which is something that we can look at the search pattern here, data. No, there you got it. This is the object we're going to send here, right? Or our state here. There we got it. Okay, empty here, as well as this is empty as well, this is empty as well here, and then we define our reductors. So for example here, for our case, we're just going to define is, this is an object, we're going to define is a function here called all, okay, like all, like a arrow function here, state and the action here, which here by defining this as an arrow function, the value of this is where it was reading, as well as that yeah, as well as the value of yeah, the value of this is where it was written. So the other is a state. Okay, so here the state dot value will be the action dot payload. Pretty simple. And then we're going to now return this. Okay, we're gonna return this by saying, hey, let me export this all function as a const here, const function here from the search pattern slice dot actions, where this is basically saying behind the scenes, hey, I am creating is a function called all, where it receives the data or the state here, and inside of that we're going to return, which is JavaScript, plain JavaScript. We're going to return is the object here that will have the type as the name of the function all. Okay, all here, followed by the payload, which contains this state. That's essentially what it's doing behind the scenes here. So Redux toolkits allow us to make our code less verbose. This is to export its actions, and then we're gonna export default our reducers, which is the search pattern dot reducer. Reducer in plural, in singular. Okay, so this is something which is a function. So this is something that you're going to do, especially if you are going to use a slice, right? So the more you do this, the quite familiar you're going to become. Okay. So here on our search pattern is when we can say, hey, let me actually import now from the React reducer they use this patch, okay, as well as let me import now from the slice, which is the search pattern slice, this action or this reducer, okay, and there is where I'm gonna say, hey, I want you to now access to the search patterns data. Where you're gonna have is the animal breed and location using this custom hook from the Redux, okay, from React Redux, okay. I want you now to take this and only, so be very specific about which property you want to map here. State that search pattern, which is our slice, dot value. All right, pretty straightforward. Exactly. And then we will need to actually anytime we perform is through the use search query here. So anytime we make is a all right, that makes a lot of sense. Okay, this is our use query. Interesting. Redux toolkit query React. Okay. Okay. As well as this. So they change the use of that. So now the using is this. The problem with this is that you don't have this catching mechanism for this. Unlike React query. That's one of the reasons why a lot of people actually are heavily relying, completely. That's why a lot of people actually heavily rely on, Jesus fucking Christ, completely. A lot of people heavily rely recently on context in React query. Period. None of these huge states, not at all. You remove that because actually React query provide you is this catching, which is something that most applications need to. So catching, data fetching, catching, data fetching, update and sync with server states. That makes a lot of sense. Oh, that, and I get it why we are looking to use this to avoid user redux. Okay, so by looking at the use dispatch here, okay, and then you say, hey, I want now to call the, or define is the dispatch, which is a hook from a custom hook from React Redux called use dispatch, okay, and here I'm going to define is on submit. Why is this? Because once the user search through this, then I want to actually make the HTTP recall and that kind of thing. In other words, I want you now to dispatch is the data that I got here. Holy moly, bro.
So const state up here. Let's go here with that. Cool. And then down here, instead of saying set request ramp, we're just going to say dispatch. Wrap this in all. There we go. So let's go back over here and look at this. So under
And the using is just query for that.
and then down here, instead of saying set request ramp, we're just going to say dispatch. Wrap this in all. So let's go back over here.
We don't have is the use query for that. Fetch breed list, there you got it. Exactly. Fetch path, allocation, and that kind of thing. So on our search patterns here, we're doing this. Instead of calling here like so, from the result, and here is showing is pets. So here is using the results here from our use breed list, but we need to use is the use query for that. Use query from the React query, what you're going to define is the as a tuple here the search as well as the pattern, but here we don't have this, or the request pattern, which is something, okay, request pattern where now our request patterns comes from our store, and when we don't have that data catch, I want you to now call is the use in fetch search fetch search exactly, fetch search. And this is something that you're going to use from here. So we're going to import is now this custom hook called fetch search for that. Fetch search. And now we're supposed to be able to look at that. There might be some error here for that. So when you inspect the code, you say, hey, what the F is all of this? No data found state.paid. Because we're using some, okay. Anyway, no problem. Okay, that makes a lot of sense. There has to be a value here because we wrap that object as a value. Okay, no problem.
Lo and behold, here we are. That was it. So here, when I was setting up search param slice, this has to be inside of value, right? So I was saying state.value equals actual payload. That makes sense. It wasn't working until I actually said state.value equals actual payload. It makes sense of why I was going to have that differently, right?
Okay.
The next thing that you and I are going to do, this application uses React Query. We've been doing that for a while. There's a thing specifically called React Toolkit Query, which is inspired by React Query. I'm going to say if you're doing Redux Toolkit, just go full into it and also use React Toolkit Query.
Mm-hmm. Okay.
The next
Redux tool query and middleware. Interesting. Mm-hmm. Okay. Okay. Which is here. Add search pattern to Redux, which is going by actually defining the state from that. Okay. Cool. Cool. Which is the search pattern slice for that. And the other is the Redux toolkit and middleware. So if you have been using Redux in your app, there is a library called
thing that you and I are going to do. This application uses React Query. We've been doing that for a while. There's a thing specifically called React Toolkit Query.
there is a library called Redux Toolkit Query, okay, that is specifically to work with Redux. That makes a lot of sense. So if you are only working with React Query, do not go for Redux Toolkit Query. Okay, but this is very narrow specific to that. It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, it makes a lot of sense.
React Query. I'm going to say if you're doing Redux Toolkit, just go full into it and also use React Toolkit Query.
Exactly. So if you are using React Toolkit, if you're using Redux, just go fully with Redux Toolkit Query. Makes a lot of sense. Makes a lot of sense.
So we're going to refactor our React Toolkit to, React Query to Redux Toolkit Query.
Oh my God. So we are going to refactor our React Query to our React Toolkit Query. This is interesting, man. This is very interesting. Okay. I'll be right back. All right, and we are back. What the F is this? Okay. All right. Here we are. All right. So here we're gonna do a migration from useQuery, from React query to Redux toolkit query. Remember, the entire reason of all of this Redux is to see how that works so you don't have to work with. Because now we have context, a React query for that.
So first things first, let's make a new file here and call it pet API service.js. Here you're going to import create API and fetch base query from Redux Toolkit. You're going to export const pet API is assigned create API. You have to give it a reducer path. We're just going to call it pet API. It uses all these names internally so that I can keep track of things and like cache them correctly. It'll be useful once we get into the Redux DevTools. You'll actually be able to follow along of where things are going. So it's good to give these a good name, a descriptive name.
Exactly, but they use this because as a way to catch this.
It'll be useful once we get into the Redux DevTools. You'll actually be able to follow along of where things are going. So it's good to give these a good name, a descriptive name. Okay, the base query is going to be a fetch base query. The base URL is going to be http://pets-v2.dev-apis.com. And then you're going to give it some endpoints. So if you have a bunch of things that are based off of one base query, as in like one base URL, you just make those into individual endpoints. And then if you have two different APIs that you're calling, you'll make another service, right? So in this particular case, we only have one service, one base URL here, so we're just going to have one service. But imagine if we have like our API endpoint and we also have the Spotify endpoint, right? We would have two different API services that we would create. Okay, and then here I'm just going to describe all of the endpoints that I'm about to hit. So this is a function. It takes in a builder, and it returns an object. We're going to make one called getPet, which is going to be builder.query, another object here, and the query is going to be ID, and it returns an object. URL pets, right? Because it's the name of like the actual like path to the pet API, that is. And the params, it just takes in the ID. So just to be super clear of what's happening here, if I call the getPet API, it's going to go to this base URL / whatever the hell is here, pets, with the query string of the ID. ID
what they're
equals
using
ID.
is builder.
Little indirection there. I know this is pretty dense, but that's what's happening here. And then here I can give it a transform response. So this is actually the raw response back from the API. All I want to store and use is the response.pets0. So if I'm requesting a specific pet, this is going to take the entire response that it gets back from the API, and it's going to give me back just the first pet in that pet array. So then now I don't have to do all of the, if this exists, give me this kind of logic. It's going to be the pet. You don't have to worry too much about it. Okay, export default, or export const rather. Use get pet query equals pet API. Oh yeah, Redux toolkit / query / React. Sorry, you have to give it like a little bit more specific what you're looking for there. All right, this one was weird to me as well. Where the hell does use get pet query come from?
Okay, use get pet query. Where the hell?
It's generated by this create API method, right? So it takes the name of my query here, which is getPet, and then it puts use on the front because this is a hook, right? It makes a custom hook for you.
Exactly.
It puts whatever you called this. So if I call this use getPet LOL, right? I'd have to put getPet LOL there, right? That's how the name is getting there.
Okay.
And then query, it attaches that on the end for you, so that you know that it's a query. Okay, is that sufficiently weird for you? It's sufficiently weird for me, so here we are. Okay, let's go put this into the store now. All right, so two things we need to put in here. One, we're going to put in the pet API from here, pet API.reducer path, pet API.reducer. Why this? The answer is the docs told me to, so I'm showing you what the docs told me to do. But really what they're trying to do here, if we go back to our, what did I call it, pet API service? Yeah, pet API service. It's just this, right? So it's actually calling it pet API. It's just making sure that's internally consistent, right? So this pet API is exactly what it's putting in
internally consistent
store. In fact, let's just, to be incredibly clear, store, and this is pet API service. So we have pet API, we have the reducer path here, right? This is just saying, hey, make sure that whatever
make sure that
this is putting out.
Make sure that whatever we're putting out here is the reducer.
Here is the same over here. It's being very pet API, we have the reducer path here, right? This is just saying, hey, make sure that whatever this is putting out from here is the same over here. It's being very explicit about that. Could you put pet API right here? Yeah, I mean, you could. It's literally exactly what this is, right? But it's nice to have it guaranteed be consistent. Because now if I decide later that, yeah, you know what, I wanted to call this pet API Very cool, right? I don't have to go change it in two places. It just changes automatically. Okay, make sense? One more thing here. This is kind of an optional step. Kind of not. We're going to give it a middleware. I can get rid of this so you can see everything. Middleware, colon, get default middleware. This is going to be a function, and we just want it to return implicitly get default middleware. Call that function .concat pet API .middleware. So what's going on with this? Redux has this concept of what's called a middleware, which is basically I dispatch an action to the store. I can intercept that in a middleware and do something about it. You can imagine maybe I'm dispatching it in one object and I want to transform it into a different object. A middleware could do that. You can introduce things like you want your Redux to be able to handle observables, right? So you can you know, catch an observable, handle it, and then from there dispatch an action to the store. We're not going to do anything like that. In general, I'm going to tell you to not really worry too much about middlewares. The only thing that might be kind of useful is like if you want to like log what was happening to your Redux to maybe a server, you could do that through a middleware. Kind of weird, but you could do it. What are we doing here? We are putting Pet API has this thing called a middleware into our Redux here. What's cool about that is now it's going to cache everything for us. So you know how React Query was caching everything for us as we were making requests? This is allowing that to happen here with React Toolkit. But you have to put the middleware in here. If I don't put this middleware in here, all of this stuff will work, but I don't think any of the caching will. Actually, I don't think that's true. I think the caching actually still does work, but there's other things like retries. It augments the ability of React Toolkit. In other words, just do it. Okay, we're really close to getting this to work now. It's all ready. We just need to go use it. So please head over to details.jsx. Remove the useQuery import up here. Remove fetchPet. And we're going to import the use get pet query from pet API service. We're going to delete this thing, the results here. And we're just going to say const is loading data colon pet equals use get pet query with the ID. And where do I declare pet? Oh, down here. So, and then you can drop this line right here. Okay, and then here where it says results is loading, just delete that so it just uses the is loading from that. All right, that is it. So now this is going to make requests through our Pet API service using RTK. When I say RTK, Redux Toolkit, right?
Exactly, RTK.
RTK. That's what everyone calls it. You'll see it always written like that, RTK, Redux Toolkit. We're using RTK to call that Pet API service, which will get us our pet for us.
Holy moly, it's because there is a lot of internal machinery there.
So we broke. What happened? Inject endpoints is not a function. Create API, fetch base query, export const pet API, create API, reducer path, looks good. Base query, fetch base query, base URL. Yeah, that looks all good to me. Endpoints. Oh, I think this is it. I think this is a lowercase p. That was it. Okay, sorry. Lowercase p. Line 6 here. End points. Okay, any questions about that? Can you spell? Apparently I cannot. So same sort of thing here. If I search for bird, it'll go get that. But if I go back and search for blank, notice it's not going to load. It's just going to instantly give it back to me because it's going to be cached directly in my Redux. Cool. So what's nice now is if I go back to my Pet API service here, adding more endpoints to this is very simple, right? Because I already have all of the base machinery in place. All I have to do if I wanted to add another one is just say get breeds and basically do the exact same pattern over again. Builder.
But it's because very verbose.
Get breeds here. Builder.query. Give it an object. Query animal. And the URL is going to be
It's because it's very verbose.
And the params is going to be animal, like that. And then you're going to give it a transform response as well. And that is going to be a response is back to response.breeds. Boom. Oh, now we have a get breeds function here. And here you just put down here use get breeds query. How easy was it that to create a whole custom hook for one API response? Pretty compelling. We'll do
Pretty
search
compelling, by the way. Yeah.
builder.query. So the query, and we're going to do this a little bit different. We're actually going to take an entire function here. So query, and that's going to be a function that takes in animal, location, breed. I guess that actually is the same, never mind. And that's going to give back URL of pets, params of
All of them.
animal, location, breed, and then the transform response of response back
Pretty
to
compelling, by the way.
response.pets.
Pretty compelling once you already.
And then now we
how
can
to
say
set up
use
everything there.
search query. And there you go. Now we have our entire API here just described like this. So let's go to use breed list. We can get rid of this. We can get rid of everything here at the top. And you're going to import use get breed query. There you go. Get rid of that.
Because we're not going to use query. In
And
fact,
delete this
we
line,
have
const
to
results,
use
const
the data from
data breeds is loading equals use get breeds query animal, and I have a skip if you have no animal, right? So if someone's trying to call use breed list without an animal, you just want to skip the query altogether, right? So you can give it this like skip parameter, right? Which allows you to say, hey, if you got no animal back, then don't make any requests to the API. You don't need to, which I think is pretty cool as well. Then you just say if no animal, return, you'll say empty array here and loaded. Otherwise, return breeds, and then you'd probably want to have more robust statuses, but for now we're just going to say if it's loading, loading, otherwise loaded. Right? More or less the same as what we had before using React Query, but now we're using our API service. So let's go make sure that this works the way that we want it to. And if I say there's no animal there, but if I put dog, we get this back. That looks good. If I go to cat, that's the back. And then if I go back to dog, everything works. Cool. One more. Let's go do search params.jsx. And we are going to get rid of use query up here. We're going to import use search query. And then the use query call down here, we're just going to say const data pets is assigned use search query with search params. That's it. That's all we need to do here. We can get rid of that. Get rid of all my console logging as well. I mean, that got even simpler, right? So I don't know. This is probably the most compelling part about Redux Toolkit. These search custom hooks that it generates for you are really quite nice to use. What is this mad about? Is it mad about something? Oh yeah, we don't need fetch search anymore. All right, so what did we do now?
You have to define pets. You have to reassign pets.
Oh yeah. If there's nothing there, you have to say pets equals pets, because you need it to be an empty array. If it's so all I did here is I changed const to let, and then if pets is an empty array, or if pets doesn't exist, then make it an empty array, because this always assumes that they're down here, that this is going to be an empty array.
God damn it. Okay.
One last thing that I wanted to show you. Let's go back to the notes here, and we're going to go down to Redux here at the Redux DevTools. So I left you a link here. Go install the Redux DevTools. I left a link here for Firefox and for Chrome. I think I have to go install it for Chrome, so let me go do that really quick. So I'm going to click Add to Chrome here. It's changing the breed. So it executes that, and you see the most compelling parts. If I refresh my page, I should have in here Redux, Redux pane. So I'm going to click on that. This is probably one of the other most compelling parts about Redux, is I can actually see everything happening inside of my Redux via this, right? So right now I'm looking at all the actions that are coming in. You can see all of these various different actions that are coming in from Pet API. These are generated by Redux Toolkit. So let's say I change this to be dog. That's going to dispatch an action. Actually, it won't.
It's gonna
Oh, will
dispatch.
it does. Okay, here we go.
Yeah.
Oh yeah, because it's changing the breed. So it executes that, and you see fulfilled, and I can see all the various different actions coming in, right? And if I click submit, you can see it calls search params all, then it does unsubscribing and pending and fulfilled and a bunch of stuff like that. But you can see step by step
the
what's going
valuable
on.
position of this.
What's cool about this though is I can start stepping back in time
You can do time
because
back.
what it's doing is it's basically just like reapplying or unapplying all these various different actions. So if I go back here, I can actually click play, and it'll just go at a rate, and I can watch, things playing out in my time traveling debugging is what that's called.
This is time travel in the bargain, bro.
I can always go in and I can see, I can reset things. I can see what the actions looked like, so you can see what was in the payload. This gives me a bunch of meta information of like when did it happen, what was the query, what were the arguments, what was the request ID, did it work, did it not work. One of my favorite things here, so let's go look at one of them that we created, like the search params all one that I did, this one. First of all, you can do things like jump to this one. You can also say, hey, what would happen if this action didn't happen? You can click skip, and it'll reapply everything and skip that action. It's kind of interesting, right? And then another thing here, I can click test. It'll actually generate a test for me that I can just copy and paste into my code, which is pretty cool. I like when my tools write tests for me, right?
Yeah, like my
Now, I'm going to argue this is a ridiculous test. Look at how much stuff it's trying to put into my test. But it's a good starter, right? This is a Jest template, but there's one for Mocha and Tape and Ava.
Oh my god, it
We're about to do
can also give
VTest
you
for our
some
testing
test.
framework. Just use the Jest one if you're doing VTest. There's the state. There's the difference. You can see like what was the delta between the two. So I went from animal to being nothing to being dog.
Exactly.
And you can see the actual
the trace.
stack trace to see what led you to calling to that. I've not found a use for that, but that's pretty cool. And that's it. So one thing that I have seen people do, which I found very interesting and a compelling use case of what the Redux toolkit can do for you, or just in general Redux. Let's say your user's application crashes, right? What I've seen people do is dump their entire like history of Redux, and then they'll send it off to Track.js or Sentry or something like that. You can then take that dump and you can put it into your DevTools, and you can literally go piece by piece of what your user did to cause the crash. So you can literally like time travel through your user crashing their application. Pretty cool, right? Pretty compelling debugging tools. So, okay. So that's Redux. That's Redux DevTools. If you want deeper dives on this, there's a Redux fundamentals course from Mr. Kinney himself. Strongly suggest that.
He's also about to release an advanced Redux using Redux Toolkit.
Oh, even better. So if you want even more advanced stuff on Redux Toolkit itself, check that out as well. If you want to see this exact same scenario that I did, look at this handsome bastard up there.
Here's the bastard here. The previous version of this.
I did teach
code.
a raw Redux before, so this is going to go through the exact same pet adoption application with raw Redux. You can do that if you are a glutton for pain. This is so much better than writing raw Redux. But if you want to, it's here. Okay. Questions about Redux? I'm hoping the feeling that you have right now is mixed. Some of that was really cool. That was a lot of work. I have mixed feelings about it. If I imparted that to you, I feel like I did my job. If you either like it too much or not at all, I feel like I didn't do it.
Exactly. It's like,
It's a trade-off, right? There's definitely trade-offs to using Redux. That's really what I want you to see. Okay. Any questions about Redux before we move on?
There's one quick question before
Oh,
we go.
yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Could you explain about the action type and when we would use it?
Sure. So let's take a look at our Redux application one more time. We're going to open the dev tool.
Release an advanced Redux using Redux Toolkit.
Oh, even better. So if you want even more advanced stuff on Redux Toolkit itself, check that out as well. If you want to see this exact same scenario that I did, look at this handsome bastard up there. I did teach a raw Redux before, so this is going to go through the exact same pet adoption application with raw Redux. You can do that if you are a glutton for pain. This is so much better than writing raw Redux. But if you want to, it's here. Okay. Questions about Redux? I'm hoping the feeling that you have right now is mixed. Some of that was really cool. That was a lot of work. I have mixed feelings about it. If I imparted that to you, I feel like I did my job. If you either like it too much or not at all, I feel like I didn't do it. It's a trade-off, right? There's definitely trade-offs to using Redux. That's really what I want you to see. Okay. Any questions about Redux before we move on?
There's one quick question before.
Oh, yeah, sure. Go ahead.
Could you explain about the action type and when we would use it?
Sure. So let's take a look at our Redux application one more time. We're going to open the DevTools. We're going to go back into Redux. Let's look. So these are what you see here. They're called the Redux action type. Let's look specifically at the search params all, because that was one that you and I made together, right? So if I look at the action here, you can see that there's a type here called search params / all. So just to describe to you where that comes from, it comes from search param slice. It comes from this name, right? So if I call this search params LOL, that would be the name, / the name of the reducer, which is all, right? So that is why this one is search params / all. Search params / all. So it's generated from the name of the reducer that you have, as well as the name that you gave the slice overall. We used to have to name these action types ourselves, but with Redux Toolkit, it generates those names for us. What's the point of the type? The type is just so that Redux knows where to send your reducer, like which reducer to send your thing to.
Interesting. Very, 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 very interesting with Redux, which is, again, the whole point of Redux is to look at what Redux can do for you and see that you don't need to actually use Redux. You can rely on context. Right now, you can rely on context or using something called use reducer for that, so it actually allows you to do this time travel debugging. But I see the value proposition of Redux Toolkit and Redux DevTool. Oh my god, that makes a lot of sense. It makes a lot of sense. Okay, so that'll be all for this video. Take care. Bye bye.